Deep beneath the surface of the Earth, right now, at this very moment, there are rooms that do not appear on any public map. Rooms with walls thick enough to survive a nuclear detonation. Rooms where the fate of entire nations can be decided in minutes. Rooms where generals, admirals, and heads of state can wage war, coordinate global military operations, and launch the most destructive weapons ever created by human hands, all from hundreds of feet underground, hidden from satellites, shielded from electromagnetic pulses, sealed against biological attack, and protected by multiple layers of armed security that most soldiers will never even see in their entire careers. These are the underground command centers, and today, we are going inside them. Not the sanitized version you have seen in movies, not the Hollywood bunker with flashing red lights and a dramatic countdown clock. The real facilities, the real history, the real technology, the real human beings who live and work inside them for weeks at a time, without ever seeing the sun. If this is the kind of story that makes you feel the weight of the world we actually live in, subscribe right now, because this channel exists to tell those stories, and we are just getting started. Let us begin with what these places actually are and why they exist, because the answer to that question is darker and more serious than most people want to think about. Every major military power on Earth has, at some point in its modern history, asked itself one terrifying question. What happens if the seat of government is destroyed? What happens if a nuclear weapon detonates over the capital city, or a coordinated strike takes out the military command structure in the opening minutes of a war, before any order can be given, before any response can be launched? What happens then? The answer that military planners arrived at, beginning in the late 1940s and accelerating dramatically through the 1950s and 1960s, was underground continuity. Bury the command structure, harden it against any conceivable weapon, duplicate the critical functions of government and military leadership deep inside granite mountains and reinforced concrete caverns. Make it so that even if the surface of the Earth is burning, someone is still alive underground, still in communication, still in command. That philosophy built some of the most extraordinary and most secret facilities in human history, and the United States built more of them, and built them deeper, and built them stronger than almost any other nation on Earth. The story starts in a mountain in Colorado, Cheyenne Mountain. If there is one underground command center in the world that has achieved something close to public recognition, it is the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And even though this facility has appeared in news reports and Hollywood films, the reality of what is inside that mountain is far stranger and far more impressive than most people understand. The complex sits inside Cheyenne Mountain, a granite peak in the Rocky Mountains. Construction began in 1961 and was completed in 1966 at a cost of approximately $142 million, which in today's money would be well over $1 billion. The mountain itself does the first layer of protection. The command center is buried under 2,000 feet of solid granite. 2,000 feet. To give you a sense of what that means, the tallest building in the United States, the One World Trade Center, stands at 1,776 feet. The rock above Cheyenne Mountain's command center is taller than that. No conventional weapon can reach it. The blast from a nuclear weapon detonating on the surface above it would be absorbed by the mountain before it ever reached the rooms inside. But the granite is only the beginning. The actual buildings inside the mountain are not connected to the rock. They are suspended from the ceiling on enormous steel springs, 1,319 springs in total, each one 3 feet in diameter and capable of compressing by up to 15 inches. The entire complex rides on those springs like a ship on water. If the mountain shakes from a nearby detonation, the buildings move independently of the rock, absorbing the shock wave without transferring it to the people and equipment inside. 15 buildings are constructed inside the mountain. They are arranged in a grid, connected by corridors, each building standing up to 3 stories tall. The largest of these buildings is about the size of a city block. Inside those buildings is everything you would need to run a war from the inside of a mountain for an extended period of time. There is a power plant that generates its own electricity. There are fuel tanks. There are water reservoirs capable of holding 1.5 million gallons of water. There is a sewage treatment system. There is a cafeteria. There are sleeping quarters. There is medical equipment. And at the heart of the complex, There are the operation centers, the rooms filled with screens and maps and communications equipment, where the real work of Cheyenne Mountain takes place. The blast doors at the entrance to the complex are legendary. They are 25-ton steel doors, designed to seal the complex against blast pressure, chemical agents, and biological threats. Each door is 3.5 feet thick. They can be closed and sealed in about 30 seconds. Once those doors are sealed, the people inside are isolated from the outside world and can remain so for extended periods. Cheyenne Mountain was originally built as the primary operations center for NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the organization jointly operated by the United States and Canada to detect and respond to any aerial or missile threat to North America. During the Cold War, this was one of the most critical military commands on the planet. The people working inside Cheyenne Mountain were the ones who would detect an incoming Soviet nuclear strike and give warning to decision-makers. They were the eyes watching the sky every single minute of every single day. In 2006, the primary operations of NORAD were moved to a nearby facility on Peterson Air Force Base, which is above ground. Cheyenne Mountain was placed in a warm standby status, meaning it is maintained and can be reactivated quickly, but is no longer the day-to-day operations hub. After the September 11th attacks and the growing concern about electromagnetic pulse attacks, which can destroy electronics across entire regions, military planners became increasingly worried that an above-ground facility was vulnerable in ways that Cheyenne Mountain was not. The mountain's granite shield protects against EMP. The hardened infrastructure protects against nuclear blast effects. In 2015, the command announced it was moving some critical systems back to Cheyenne Mountain, specifically because of EMP concerns. The mountain, in other words, is still relevant. It is still operational. And depending on what the threat environment looks like, it could once again become the nerve center of North American air defense at any moment. The people who work there live a strange and demanding life. Shifts inside the mountain can last many hours. The environment is climate-controlled, but there is no natural light. There are no windows. The sun does not exist inside Cheyenne Mountain. Workers often describe a distinct disorientation that comes from spending extended time underground, particularly during exercises when the blast doors are sealed and the outside world effectively disappears. The cafeteria serves real meals. There is coffee. There is the routine of work and shift changes. But there is always the awareness, underneath everything, that you are inside a mountain, and that the mountain exists because the people who built it believed nuclear war was coming. That awareness does not leave you. Now let us talk about a facility that is far less known than Cheyenne Mountain, but which served an equally extraordinary purpose: Raven Rock, the alternate National Military Command Center. While Cheyenne Mountain watches the sky, there is another underground complex in the mountains of southern Pennsylvania, whose purpose is to keep the civilian and military chain of command alive and functioning, even after a catastrophic nuclear attack on Washington, D.C. This is Site R, the Raven Rock Mountain Complex. Site R sits inside Raven Rock Mountain, near Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania, approximately 14 miles from Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland. Construction began in 1948, and the facility became operational in 1953. The location was chosen for a simple reason. It is far enough from Washington, D.C. to survive a nuclear detonation in the capital, but close enough to remain connected to the command structure in normal times. The complex inside Raven Rock Mountain is enormous. Like Cheyenne Mountain, the buildings are constructed on springs to absorb shock waves. There are multiple buildings inside the mountain, including office spaces, communication centers, sleeping quarters, dining facilities, and the command rooms, where military leaders would direct the conduct of a war. Raven Rock is officially designated as the alternate National Military Command Center. That word alternate is doing a lot of work. It means that if the Pentagon, which is the primary National Military Command Center, is destroyed, Raven Rock takes over. The people inside Site R have the authority and the communications capability to continue directing military operations, including nuclear operations, from inside a Pennsylvania mountain. During the Cold War, this facility was maintained in a constant state of readiness. There were always personnel on site, always communications active, always the systems ready to assume command at a moment's notice. The staff who worked there rotated through on a regular basis, and the facility was treated with the utmost operational security. Even today, details about what happens inside Raven Rock are classified. We know the basics of its history and purpose because of declassified documents and reporting. But the specific capabilities, the specific people, the specific procedures are not public knowledge. What we do know is that on the morning of September 11, 2001, as the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon unfolded, Vice President Dick Cheney was evacuated to a secure location. That secure location was not initially Raven Rock, but the events of that day brought unprecedented attention to the continuity of government infrastructure, and Raven Rock, along with other undisclosed facilities, became more active than they had been in years. There is one detail about Raven Rock that gives you a sense of the seriousness with which it was built and maintained. The facility has its own fuel supply. It has its own water supply. It has its own power generation. It is designed to be fully self-sufficient for an extended period, completely cut off from the outside world, completely sealed, completely operational. The people inside would be able to continue doing their jobs, coordinating military operations, maintaining communication with submarines and aircraft and field commanders around the world, for as long as necessary. The word "as long as necessary" carries a weight that is difficult to fully absorb. These facilities were built on the assumption that there might not be anything left to come back to, that the world outside the mountain might, in the worst-case scenario, require the people inside to keep running the military for an indefinite period in a post-nuclear environment. That is the reality that drove every design decision, every reinforced wall, every blast door, every spring-mounted building. Mount Weather, the continuity of government, goes deeper than the military. The United States government also maintains a separate classified facility in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, designed to shelter the civilian leadership of the country in the event of a catastrophic attack. This is Mount Weather, officially known as the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, operated by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Mount Weather exists for a purpose that most Americans have never seriously contemplated. If the federal government were destroyed in a nuclear attack, if the president, the vice president, the congressional leadership, the cabinet, and the Supreme Court were all killed simultaneously, the country would need some way to reconstitute itself, to maintain the legal and governmental structure that makes the United States function. Mount Weather is part of that plan. The facility has both above-ground components and a massive underground complex. The underground portion is built inside the mountain, with reinforced construction designed to survive nuclear effects. Inside, there are offices, communication systems, dormitories, cafeterias, a hospital, a crematorium, and the infrastructure needed to house and support a significant number of essential personnel for an extended period. Over the decades, Mount Weather has served as the designated relocation site for the heads of cabinet departments in an emergency. If a nuclear attack appeared imminent, helicopters would lift key government officials from Washington, D.C., and transport them to Mount Weather. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, and other senior officials would be flown to the facility, which would then be sealed. A shadow government, legally empowered to continue the functions of the United States government, would operate from inside that mountain. The facility was largely secret for decades. Its existence became more widely known after a 1974 airplane crash near the mountain that drew media attention to the area. Additional information emerged over the following years through investigative reporting and eventually through partial declassification. But the full scope of what Mount Weather contains and what its current operational plans look like remains classified. What is not classified is the concept behind it, the idea of continuity of government, which holds that the constitutional order of the United States must survive any attack, any catastrophe, and any effort by any enemy to decapitate the American government. Mount Weather is one piece of that survival plan. Raven Rock is another. And there are others, facilities and procedures that are not publicly identified, backup systems for the backup systems, redundancy built upon redundancy, because when you are planning for the end of the world as you know it, you do not leave anything to chance. The Pentagon's own bunker. Most people know the Pentagon as the largest office building in the world, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, a massive 5-sided structure in Arlington, Virginia, that covers nearly 30 acres and houses tens of thousands of workers. What most people do not know is that the Pentagon has its own underground command center, a hardened facility built beneath the building that can serve as a command post in the event of an attack or emergency. The details of the Pentagon's underground facilities are among the most closely held secrets in the American defense establishment. What is known is that there are significant underground spaces beneath the Pentagon, that some of these spaces are hardened against blast effects, and that they contain communications equipment and command infrastructure that would allow military leadership to continue operating even if the above-ground portions of the building were damaged or destroyed. The September 11th attacks made this more than theoretical. American Airlines Flight 77 struck the western face of the Pentagon at 9:37 in the morning, killing 184 people and causing catastrophic damage to a section of the building. In the hours following that attack, military leadership operated from various command posts, some above ground, some below, coordinating the response to the attacks and the unprecedented decision to ground all civilian aviation in the United States. The attack on the Pentagon demonstrated that the threats military planners had been worried about for decades were not theoretical exercises. They were real, and the need for hardened, protected command facilities was as urgent as it had ever been during the Cold War. The National Military Command Center inside the Pentagon, which is the primary command and control hub of the entire United States military, has continuity systems in place that allow its functions to be transferred to alternative facilities in the event the building itself is compromised. Raven Rock is one of those alternatives. There are others, and the procedures that govern that transfer are practiced regularly, in classified exercises where the assumption is that the worst has already happened, and the question now is, what do you do next? The submarine as a command center. Not all of the military's most secret command centers are underground in the traditional sense. Some of them are underwater. The United States Navy maintains a fleet of Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, 14 of them currently carrying nuclear weapons, that serve a dual purpose. They are weapons platforms, capable of launching nuclear missiles at any target on Earth from anywhere in the world's oceans. But they are also, in a sense, mobile command centers. Each of these submarines carries the communications equipment necessary to receive orders from the National Command Authority. They operate on a concept called survivable command and control, which means that even if every fixed command facility in the United States is destroyed, the submarines can still receive the order to fire and execute that order. The communication systems used to reach submarines on patrol are extraordinary. Submarines at depth cannot use normal radio frequencies. The ocean blocks most of the electromagnetic spectrum. To communicate with submarines, the Navy uses extremely low-frequency radio signals, which can penetrate seawater to considerable depths. These signals are transmitted from massive antenna arrays that cover hundreds of square miles of ground. One of these arrays is located in northern Michigan. Another is in Wisconsin. They operate continuously, broadcasting the signals that tell submarines whether the world is normal or whether something catastrophic has happened. The submarines also receive communications from aircraft. The E-6B Mercury aircraft, operated by the Navy, are specifically designed to serve as airborne relay stations for communicating with submarines. They carry a very low-frequency trailing wire antenna that can be lowered from the aircraft while it flies at altitude, allowing it to transmit signals that reach submarines operating far below the surface. If every ground-based command center is destroyed, the E-6B can still reach the submarines. If the E-6B is also shot down, the submarines themselves carry procedures for what to do when they stop receiving communications for an extended period. The procedures are classified, but the concept is part of what military strategists call a second strike capability, the ability to absorb a nuclear attack and still respond. The submarines at sea are the ultimate backstop of that capability. They are always out there, right now, hidden in the ocean, waiting, watching, ready. The Looking Glass. For decades during the Cold War, the United States Air Force flew an aircraft known as the Looking Glass, a modified Boeing EC-135 that served as the airborne command post for the Strategic Air Command. The concept was elegant and terrifying in equal measure. If the ground-based command facilities were destroyed in a nuclear first strike, the Looking Glass was already airborne, already manned, already capable of commanding the entire nuclear arsenal of the United States. From 1961 to 1990, the Looking Glass maintained continuous airborne alert. That means there was always, at every moment, day and night, weekend and weekday, holiday and ordinary day, for 29 consecutive years, a Looking Glass aircraft in the air, somewhere over the United States. Inside the aircraft was a general officer with the authority to order nuclear strikes. There was a communications suite capable of reaching submarines, land-based missile silos, and bomber aircraft. There was a battle staff of trained specialists who could, if ordered, direct the conduct of nuclear war from inside a converted Boeing jetliner, flying at 35,000 feet. The aircraft itself would not survive a nuclear war. It had no meaningful protection against the effects of nuclear weapons. But the idea was that it would be airborne before the missiles arrived, flying a pattern designed to keep it away from known target areas, and therefore surviving long enough to execute its mission. The continuous airborne alert ended in 1990 as the Cold War wound down. But the mission did not end. The aircraft was replaced with a more modern version, the E-6B Mercury, that we discussed in relation to submarine communications. And the concept of airborne command post remains active. Today, the United States maintains several types of airborne command post aircraft, including the E-4B Nightwatch, which is operated by the Air Force and designated as the National Airborne Operations Center. This aircraft, known colloquially as the Doomsday Plane, is a modified Boeing 747 designed to serve as an airborne command post for the President, the Secretary of Defense, or their designated successors in the event of a national emergency. 4 of these aircraft exist. One is maintained on continuous alert, ready to take off within minutes of notification. If the President needs to be evacuated from Washington, D.C. in a crisis, the E-4B is the mobile command center that would allow the Commander-in-Chief to direct military operations from the air, unreachable, untouchable, continuously in communication with nuclear forces around the world. The aircraft can refuel in flight. Theoretically, it can remain airborne for days. It has communication systems capable of reaching every element of the nuclear triad: the land-based missiles, the submarine-launched missiles, and the bomber aircraft. It carries a battle staff capable of advising the President through a nuclear crisis. And it is flying right now, somewhere over the United States, ready. The underground installations of the Cold War that you have never heard of, Cheyenne Mountain and Mount Weather and Raven Rock, get most of the public attention. But they were not the only facilities built during the Cold War to ensure the survival of the American command structure. There were dozens of others, many of which have been partially or fully declassified in recent decades, and some of which remain entirely secret to this day. The Greenbrier Bunker is one of the most extraordinary examples. For nearly 3 decades, from 1962 to 1992, a massive secret underground facility existed beneath the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. The Greenbrier was, and remains, one of the most exclusive resort hotels in the United States. Wealthy guests, politicians, and celebrities stayed there regularly. For nearly 30 years, those guests had no idea that beneath the resort's elegant grounds was a 112,000 square foot underground facility designed to house the entire United States Congress in the event of a nuclear war. The facility had a full legislative chamber for the House of Representatives. It had a full legislative chamber for the Senate. It had communications rooms, dormitories, a cafeteria, a medical clinic, and enough supplies to support hundreds of people for 60 days. The idea was that if nuclear war appeared imminent, members of Congress would be evacuated from Washington, D.C. and transported to the Greenbrier, where they would shelter underground while the attack unfolded, and then emerge to reconstitute the legislative branch of the American government. The facility was built in secret during the construction of a new wing of the resort hotel. It was maintained in secret for decades by a cover company that supposedly provided technical services to the hotel. The staff of that company were actually government employees responsible for maintaining the bunker's systems and keeping it ready for immediate use. The secret held for 30 years. It was revealed in 1992 by a reporter from the Washington Post, Ted Gupp, who broke the story in a lengthy investigative piece. The government, faced with the exposure, acknowledged the facility's existence and subsequently decommissioned it. The Greenbrier Bunker is now a museum. You can tour it, You can see the legislative chambers, the dormitories, the decontamination showers, the communications equipment. You can stand in the room where the Senate was supposed to convene after the bombs fell, and look at the rows of chairs and the podium and the American flag, and try to imagine the world in which this room would have been used for its intended purpose. It is one of the most sobering places in the United States. There were similar facilities built for other levels of government. The Federal Reserve maintained its own hardened facility to protect the financial records and gold reserves that would be needed to reconstitute the American economy after a nuclear war. Each military branch had its own continuity of operations plans and facilities. Civil defense authorities built regional operations centers designed to coordinate disaster response in the aftermath of a nuclear attack. The scale of the planning was enormous, and most of it was completely invisible to the American public. Because how do you tell people that you are building bunkers to survive the end of civilization? How do you have that conversation without causing panic? The answer, for decades, was that you did not have it. You built the bunkers in secret, maintained them in secret, and hoped that the secrecy itself was part of the deterrence. The Russians had their own version of this problem, and their own version of the solution. Russia's underground world. The Soviet Union, and now Russia, built an underground command infrastructure that is, by many accounts, even more extensive than the American one. The Soviets were deeply committed to the idea of continuity of command, partly because of their historical experience. The Soviet Union had lost an almost incomprehensible number of people in the Second World War, somewhere between 27 million and 40 million, by various estimates. They knew what total war looked like. They knew what it meant to have your government threatened at its core, and they built their military command infrastructure with that experience in mind. The most famous element of Russia's underground command structure is a system known in the West as the dead hand, and in Russia as perimeter. This is one of the most chilling military concepts ever implemented by any government in human history. Dead hand is an automated nuclear launch system. It was built on the premise that if a nuclear attack killed the Soviet leadership, including all the people who would normally have to authorize a nuclear response, the system could automatically detect the attack, determine that no human command authority remained functional, and launch nuclear missiles without any human authorization at all. The system monitors seismic sensors, radiation detectors, and communications traffic. If those sensors indicate a nuclear attack has occurred, and if the system cannot reach any human authority in the normal command chain, it can fire. It sends a launch command, not through a human operator, but through a dedicated communication system that reaches all of the Soviet, now Russian, nuclear forces. Dead Hand was built as the ultimate deterrent against a decapitating first strike. The logic was that even if you killed every Soviet decision-maker, the missiles would still fly. There was no way to win by killing the leadership. The machine would respond. This system reportedly remains operational today. Whether it is in an active mode or a standby mode is not publicly known, but the Russians have made statements suggesting that it continues to exist as part of their nuclear posture. The existence of Dead Hand tells you something profound about the philosophy behind underground command centers. The Americans built their bunkers and their airborne command posts to keep human beings alive so that human beings could make decisions. The Soviets built a system that removes human beings from the equation entirely. Both approaches reflect a deep and terrifying logic. Both represent the extreme end of military planning, the point where you are not planning for war anymore. You are planning for the end. The Moscow Metro and Russia's deep bunkers. The Russians also built, during the Soviet era, an extensive network of deep underground facilities beneath Moscow and other major cities. The Moscow Metro, the subway system, has long been rumored to include a secret second network, sometimes called Metro 2 or D6, that runs deeper than the public subway and connects key government and military facilities. The Russian government has never confirmed the existence of Metro 2, but there are numerous accounts from former Soviet and Russian officials that describe a deep tunnel network beneath Moscow designed to allow the rapid evacuation of senior leadership from the Kremlin and other key locations to hardened underground facilities outside the city. The accounts describe a system that runs at a depth of several hundred feet below the surface, with trains that can move senior officials to underground bunkers at Ramenki, a facility reportedly capable of housing thousands of people for extended periods. There are also deep bunkers at Yamantau Mountain in the southern Urals, a facility that has attracted considerable American intelligence attention over the decades. The construction activity at Yamantau during the 1990s, even after the Cold War had supposedly ended, was substantial and unexplained. American officials repeatedly asked Russian officials what was being built there. The Russians gave various non-answers, referring to it as a mining site, or a food storage facility, or a government reserve facility. None of the explanations fully satisfied American analysts, who noted that the scale of construction was far larger than any of those stated purposes would require. What is inside Yamantau Mountain remains unknown, but its location deep inside the Ural Mountains, far from any coast and well protected by the mountain terrain, is consistent with the purpose of a hardened command and survival facility, Britain's underground war rooms. The United States and Russia are not the only countries that invested heavily in underground command infrastructure. Britain has its own remarkable history of buried command centers, beginning with the famous Cabinet War Rooms used by Winston Churchill and his government during the Second World War. The Cabinet War Rooms were located beneath the Treasury Building in Westminster, in the heart of London. They were a network of reinforced basement rooms that served as the nerve center of the British war effort during the Blitz and throughout the most dangerous years of the conflict. Churchill slept there. His cabinet met there. The maps that tracked the progress of the war were maintained there. The rooms have been preserved essentially as they were in 1945, and they are now a public museum, the Churchill War Rooms, that any visitor to London can tour. But the Cabinet War Rooms were just the beginning. As the nuclear age arrived and the threat environment changed dramatically, Britain built new facilities designed for the nuclear era. The most significant of these was a facility known as Burlington, also called Turnstile, located in a former stone quarry near Corsham in Wiltshire. Burlington was a massive underground complex carved out of an existing network of tunnels and quarry workings, covering approximately 240 acres underground at a depth of about 100 feet. The facility was designed to serve as the alternative seat of government for the United Kingdom in the event of a nuclear attack. It could house up to 4,000 people, including the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, senior civil servants, and military chiefs. It had its own power supply, water supply, telephone exchange, radio broadcasting studio, and enough food and supplies to sustain its occupants for a period of months. Burlington remained fully operational from 1961 until 2004, when it was decommissioned and its existence was officially acknowledged for the first time. Like the Greenbrier in the United States, it is now accessible to the public through guided tours organized by a local heritage trust. The experience of standing in the Prime Minister's office, 100 feet underground, in a facility that was kept secret for over 40 years, is genuinely extraordinary. The facility answers a question that most people never think to ask. What was the plan? Not the public plan, not the official plan that the government announces to reassure the population, but the real plan, the one they built in secret and maintained in secret and never told anyone about until there was no longer any reason to keep it hidden. Burlington was the answer. Get the Prime Minister underground. Get the Cabinet underground. Keep the machinery of government running, even as the surface of Britain burned. Run the country, or what was left of it, from inside a quarry in Wiltshire. Today's command infrastructure. Understanding the facilities of the past is important. But what about today? What does the underground command infrastructure of the 21st century look like? The honest answer is that we know far less about the current state of these facilities than we do about the historical ones. Governments are, if anything, more secretive about current capabilities than they are about historical ones. What we can say with confidence is that the core concept has not changed. The United States government still maintains a network of hardened facilities designed to ensure the continuity of government and military command in the event of a catastrophic attack. Raven Rock is still operational. The National Airborne Operations Center, the E-4B Nightwatch aircraft, is still on continuous alert. The ballistic missile submarines are still on patrol. The command and control infrastructure of the nuclear triad is still designed to survive a first strike and respond. What has changed is the nature of the threat environment. During the Cold War, the primary threat was nuclear weapons delivered by ballistic missiles. The facilities were designed around that specific threat. Today, The threat environment is significantly more complex. Nuclear weapons remain a concern, but military planners now also worry about cyber attacks capable of disrupting command and control systems. They worry about hypersonic missiles that travel so fast that warning times are compressed dramatically compared to Cold War-era ballistic missiles. They worry about space-based weapons that could destroy the satellites on which modern military communications depend. They worry about electromagnetic pulse attacks that could disable electronic systems across entire regions. Each of these new threats requires new responses, new hardening measures, new redundancy systems, new alternative communications pathways. The underground facilities that were designed in the 1950s and 1960s were hardened against the physics of nuclear blast and radiation. Whether they are adequately hardened against the electronic and cyber threats of the 21st century is a question that military planners are actively working to address. The 2015 decision to move some NORAD systems back to Cheyenne Mountain, specifically because of EMP concerns, is one indication that the old underground facilities are still considered valuable in the new threat environment. The mountain does not care about cyber attacks. The granite does not conduct electricity. The physical hardening that was built to protect against nuclear weapons may, in some respects, also protect against the electronic warfare threats of the 21st century. There have also been reports, not officially confirmed, of new underground facilities being built in recent years, designed from the ground up to address modern threats. The construction of classified facilities is, by definition, difficult to track publicly, but given the scale of investment the United States government makes in defense infrastructure, and given the nature of the current threat environment, it would be surprising if the existing network of hardened facilities was not being supplemented and modernized. The human beings inside the mountain. We have talked about the physical facilities, the steel and concrete and granite and blast doors and springs, but it is worth spending time on the human dimension of these places, because that is ultimately what makes them real. The people who work in underground command centers, whether at Cheyenne Mountain or at Raven Rock, or at any of the dozens of other facilities that exist as part of the American continuity of government infrastructure, are not robots. They are human beings, and the environment they work in is profoundly unusual. There is no natural light underground. There are no windows. The rhythm of day and night that every human being is biologically attuned to simply does not exist inside a mountain. Workers maintain schedules through artificial means, through shift changes and meal times and the marking of the clock. But the body knows that something is wrong. Extended time underground affects sleep patterns, affects mood, affects the sense of time passing. Veterans of long stints inside hardened facilities frequently describe a particular kind of disorientation, a feeling that time is both standing still and moving too fast, a disconnection from the world above that is difficult to articulate to people who have not experienced it. The work itself can be both intensely demanding and intensely monotonous. During a normal period, when there is no active crisis, the job is to watch, to monitor, to track, to be ready. Day after day of tracking aircraft on radar screens, of monitoring communication circuits, of running tests and drills and exercises, of maintaining equipment that you hope you will never need to use for its intended purpose. And then, occasionally, the normal period ends. The sensors pick up something unexpected. An aircraft deviates from its expected course. A communications circuit goes silent. A threat indicator changes state. In those moments, the people inside the mountain have to be ready to shift instantly from routine watchstanding to emergency response, from monitoring to decision-making, from waiting to acting. The training for that shift is extensive. The exercises that military command centers run are designed to be as realistic as possible, to simulate the actual conditions of a crisis, to force the people inside to practice the procedures that would govern their actions in an actual emergency. Some of those exercises are classified in their entirety. The scenarios they practice, the procedures they follow, the decisions they make during the exercises are not publicly known. What is known is that the training is rigorous, continuous, and treated with deadly seriousness by every person involved, because the people who work in these facilities understand, in a way that most people never have to, what it would actually mean if the procedures were ever used for real. They know that the blast doors are not metaphorical. They know that the springs that hold the buildings are not decorative. They know that the water reservoirs and the fuel tanks and the food supplies exist because someone, somewhere, made a very serious calculation about how long those things might be needed. That knowledge changes you. Former workers at facilities like Cheyenne Mountain speak about it in terms that are hard to categorize. It is not fear, exactly. It is more like a heightened sense of gravity, a constant awareness of the weight of the work that does not leave you, even when you go home, at the end of the shift, if you can go home. Because during exercises and during real-world heightened alert periods, going home is not an option. You are inside the mountain. The doors are sealed, and you do the job. The command authority inside. Beyond the physical environment, there is the question of authority. What actually happens inside these facilities when a real crisis occurs? Who makes decisions? Who has the authority to do what? The answers to those questions are among the most carefully guarded secrets in the American government, because they go to the heart of how the United States would function, or attempt to function, in the most catastrophic scenarios imaginable. What is publicly known is the broad outline. The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief. The authority to order the use of nuclear weapons rests with the President alone. The military officers who sit inside underground command centers do not have independent authority to launch nuclear weapons. They execute orders. They do not originate them. This is not an accident or an oversight. It is a deliberate and fundamental feature of the American system of civilian control of the military. The military executes the orders of elected civilians. That principle holds even in the most extreme scenarios, even if the surface world is destroyed, even if communications are difficult or interrupted. The system is designed to ensure that military action, particularly nuclear military action, is authorized by civilian authority. The procedures that govern the authentication and execution of nuclear orders are classified in their entirety. The physical devices used to authenticate those orders, the communication systems used to transmit them, the procedures followed by military operators to verify and execute them are all classified. What is known is that the system has multiple layers of verification designed to prevent unauthorized or accidental launches. The nightmare scenario that command center operators train against is not just enemy action. It is also the possibility of a mistake, the possibility that a sensor error, or a communications failure, or a misidentified radar return could trigger a cascade of actions that leads to catastrophic consequences. There have been incidents over the decades that brought the world closer to that outcome than most people realize. In 1983, a Soviet early warning satellite detected what appeared to be an American missile launch. The duty officer at the Soviet Warning Center, a man named Stanislav Petrov, correctly assessed that the detection was a false alarm and did not report it up the chain of command as a real attack. His judgment was correct. The satellite had misread the sun's reflection off clouds. Had he reported it as a real attack, the Soviet response might have been a nuclear strike. Petrov's decision not to report it may have saved hundreds of millions of lives. He was not decorated for this. He was not celebrated. He was in fact quietly reprimanded for not following proper procedures. He received formal recognition only decades later. His story is one of the most important and least known of the entire Cold War. It reminds you that inside these command centers, in the most critical moments, it is a human being making a judgment call. A person with a name and a history and a family at home who has to decide, in the space of minutes, whether what they are seeing on their screens is real or not, and that the fate of the world can rest on that decision, the legacy of what they built. We are living in the world that these underground command centers helped to create. The Cold War did not end in nuclear war. That is not a small thing. It is perhaps the most important geopolitical fact of the second half of the 20th century. The nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union lasted for decades. Both sides had weapons capable of destroying civilization. Both sides believed that the other side might use them, and yet they did not. The deterrence held. The argument, and it is a serious argument, made by serious people, is that the hardened command infrastructure contributed to that outcome. By making it impossible to win a nuclear war through a decapitating first strike, by ensuring that a nuclear attack would always trigger a nuclear response, the underground bunkers and the airborne command posts and the submarines on patrol made nuclear war unwinnable. And a war you cannot win, you do not start. That argument is not comfortable. It is built on a foundation of mutual terror. It means that the peace was kept not by goodwill or diplomacy alone, but by the credible threat of annihilation. But comfort is not the standard by which we evaluate historical outcomes. The standard is what happened. And what happened is that the Cold War ended without a nuclear exchange. The blast doors at Cheyenne Mountain were never sealed in anger. The Looking Glass aircraft that flew continuous alert for 29 years never had to relay a nuclear launch order. The Greenbrier bunker, where Congress was supposed to reconvene after the bombs fell, was never used for that purpose. The people who built those facilities and maintained them and staffed them for decades might argue that the fact they were never used for their intended purpose is not a failure. It is the greatest possible success. The facilities existed. The enemy knew they existed. And knowing they existed, the enemy did not act. The burden and the honor. There is something important to say about the men and women who work in these facilities, who have worked in them over the decades. They are not celebrated. They do not receive medals for sitting watch in a mountain for months at a time. They do not get parades. They do not, for the most part, even get to talk about what they